you ever get the feeling that you're standing on the precipice of history? That the daily headlines, the distant rumbles of conflict, the pervasive sense of global unease are not just random events, but pieces of a puzzle falling into place. There is one small sliver of land on Earth, no bigger than the state of New Jersey, that has been the epicenter of that feeling for millennia. Why does Israel ignite such passion, such devotion, such conflict? What is the secret hidden within its ancient soil that has drawn the gaze of empires, the fury of armies, and the hope of prophets for thousands of years? The answer is not found in modern politics or fleeting news cycles. It's etched into the pages of an ancient text, a divine script that laid out the entire drama before it ever began. On our channel, we delve into these sacred mysteries, and tonight, we are going to unlock a story that begins with two brothers, two promises, and one God who swore an oath that would echo through eternity, shaping nations and defining the fate of the world. We will trace the invisible lines of an ancient rivalry that now manifests as a nuclear standoff between Israel and Iran. Is this merely a geopolitical struggle, or are we witnessing the gears of prophecy turning before our very eyes? Stay with us until the very end, because what we are about to reveal is not just history, it is a blueprint for the future. The truth we uncover may forever alter the way you see the world and your place in it. The conclusion will surprise you, and it promises to connect everything in a way you never thought possible. But before we unlock this ancient mystery, I want you to do something for me. Look around you. Where are you right now? What time is it? Drop it in the comments below. Let's create a global snapshot of this moment, right before everything you think you know about our future is about to change. Long before the modern state of Israel unfurled its flag, before the Persian Empire re-emerged as the Islamic Republic of Iran, and even before the dawn of Islam itself, the seeds of one of history's most enduring and explosive conflicts were sown in the life of a single man. His name was Abram, a man from the Mesopotamian city of Ur of the Chaldees. The biblical narrative, as recorded in Genesis chapter 12, tells us that God Almighty called Abram out from his homeland and his kin, presenting him with a covenant of staggering proportions. God promised that from Abram would spring a great nation, that his name would be renowned, and that through him all the families of the earth would be blessed. Central to this promise was the inheritance of a specific designated piece of land, a divine grant deed that would become the focal point of world history. Yet there was a profound and deeply human obstacle. Abram, later renamed Abraham, and his wife Sarai, later Sarah, were old and childless. The promised heir, the vessel for this divine legacy, did not exist. As year bled into decade, the silence of Sarah's womb became a source of immense anxiety and doubt. In an act born of desperation and a desire to help God fulfill his own promise, Sarah fell back on a common custom of her time. She gave her Egyptian handmaiden Hagar to her husband. From this union, a son was born, Ishmael. God's blessing was indeed upon Ishmael. The scriptures record that God heard his cries and promised to make him fruitful, to multiply him exceedingly, and to make of him a great nation, with 12 princes descending from his line. But the divine decree was also painfully clear. Ishmael was the son of human effort, not the son of the divine promise. He was blessed, but he was not the chosen one to carry the sacred covenant. Several years later, in a stunning display of divine power that defied all natural law, when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah 90, she miraculously conceived and gave birth to Isaac. He was the son of laughter, the child of the promise, the one through whom God's everlasting covenant would be established. Here, in this crucible of family drama, the very first seeds of a rivalry were planted, a spiritual and genealogical schism whose tremors still shake the world today. Ishmael, the firstborn, was paternally acknowledged but spiritually bypassed as the heir to the covenant. Isaac, the miracle child, was divinely chosen to perpetuate the lineage that would become the nation of Israel. The Lord's prophecy concerning Ishmael in Genesis 16:12 is hauntingly prescient. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. This was not merely a prediction of a single man's temperament. It was a character sketch for a future of perpetual friction. The tension between the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Isaac was destined to transcend generations, morphing from a family feud into a clash of peoples, cultures, faiths, and national identities. Therefore, the conflict that we see erupting today between Israel and the Arab nations, and more pointedly with Iran, did not begin with disputes over oil fields, modern borders, or political ideologies. It began with a spiritual inheritance dispute, a profound argument over a divine promise, sacred identity, and the right to be called the primary heirs of the God of Abraham. Following Abraham's death, the paths of Ishmael and Isaac diverged dramatically, carving out the geopolitical and spiritual landscapes that define the Middle East to this day. Isaac remained within the promised land, Canaan, where his son Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel, would father the 12 sons who became the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Israel. This lineage was geographically anchored to the land of the covenant, their destiny interwoven with the soil beneath their feet. Ishmael, meanwhile, true to God's blessing, became the father of 12 powerful Arab princes who spread out across the vast, arid landscapes of the desert. The descendants of Ishmael, the Ishmaelites, established their domains primarily to the south and east of Canaan, in the regions that correspond today to Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and parts of Iraq, and other territories of the Arabian Peninsula. Over centuries, these Ishmaelite tribes grew in number, influence, and power. Though they shared a common ancestral root with the Hebrew people, they forged their own distinct cultures, tribal religions, and a separate identity that was often defined in opposition to the children of Isaac. This geographical separation soon became a profound spiritual chasm. While the sons of Isaac adhered to the patriarchal faith and the covenant with the God of Israel, the descendants of Ishmael increasingly followed different ancestral traditions and polytheistic beliefs. This state of affairs would continue for many centuries, until the advent of Islam would radically reshape their spiritual landscape. Nevertheless, the physical proximity between these two peoples created constant friction. The Bible documents numerous interactions between the Hebrews and the Ishmaelite peoples, some marked by cooperation, but many more by rivalry. Disputes over land, vital water wells, grazing rights for livestock, and control of lucrative trade routes became the backdrop for centuries of tension between these Semitic cousins, planting the seeds of an antagonism that would only deepen with time. Centuries later, this tribal division would escalate to the scale of empires. The descendants of Isaac would give rise to the kingdom of Israel. The descendants of Ishmael would form the bedrock of the powerful Arab peoples, who would later be unified under a new dynamic faith, Islam. The ancient dispute over blessing, lineage, and identity would set the stage for the monumental religious, political, and territorial wars that would dominate the entire history of the Middle East. A conflict whose origins lie not in the last century, but in the last 4 millennia. As the centuries passed, the descendants of Ishmael blossomed into a multitude of diverse Arab tribes scattered across the vast desert of the Arabian Peninsula. They lived as Bedouins, masters of the desert, as shrewd merchants controlling the incense and spice routes, and as fierce warriors, their lives governed by codes of honor and clan loyalty. Theirs was a tribal society, fiercely independent, yet bound by a shared heritage that all traced back to Abraham. Spiritually, these tribes had largely embraced polytheism, worshiping a pantheon of local deities and spirits. One of the most significant centers of this religious life was the city of Mecca, which housed the Kaaba, an ancient cube-shaped sanctuary containing over 360 different idols. Mecca was not just a religious hub, it was a bustling nexus of commerce and culture for the entire region. Into this world, in the year 570 AD, a man named Muhammad was born. He belonged to the Quraysh tribe, a lineage widely believed to descend from Ishmael. At the age of 40, Muhammad claimed to have received a series of revelations from the angel Gabriel, delivering a message that was both simple and revolutionary. There is only one true God, Allah. Muhammad began to preach a strict monotheistic faith, proclaiming himself to be the final prophet in the long line of Abraham, a successor to Moses and Jesus. He passionately condemned the idolatry rampant in Mecca and taught that the one true religion was Islam, which literally means submission to the will of God. His radical ideas sparked immense conflict in Mecca, forcing Muhammad and his small band of followers to flee to the city of Medina in 622 AD. This event, known as the Hijra, marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar and was the turning point in his mission. In Medina, he gained a significant following, consolidated his authority as both a religious and political leader, established an army, and eventually returned to Mecca as a conqueror. After his death, his successors, the caliphs, leaders who held both political and religious authority, continued the expansion of Islam with astonishing speed. In less than 100 years, the Islamic world stretched from North Africa to Persia, from the Iberian Peninsula in Europe to the heart of Central Asia. Thus, it was not merely a new religion that was born, but a new civilization, the Islamic Empire. Unified by faith, a common language of scripture, a shared culture, and formidable military power, Islam profoundly and permanently transformed the political and spiritual map of the Middle East. And with this new faith came a new narrative about the legacy of Abraham. Islamic tradition and the Quran began to assert that it was Ishmael, not Isaac, who was the true son of the promise, the one Abraham was asked to sacrifice. This profound theological divergence would become the very heart of the conflict with the people of Israel, reigniting the ancient rivalry with a new and powerful religious fervor. For nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people had been scattered across the globe, a nation without a state. Following the catastrophic destruction of Jerusalem and its second temple by the Roman legions in 70 AD, the sovereign nation of Israel ceased to exist. The Jews were dispersed into a global diaspora, often facing relentless persecution, yet they miraculously never lost their unique identity or their faith in the biblical promise of an eventual return. For centuries they prayed facing Jerusalem. Their festivals, their traditions, and their sacred scriptures kept alive the burning hope of one day returning to their ancestral homeland. This deep-seated yearning was galvanized into a powerful political force in the 19th century with the rise of the Zionist movement, a concerted effort to re-establish a Jewish state in the land of Israel. The momentum of Zionism grew exponentially in the horrific aftermath of the Holocaust, when 6 million Jews were systematically murdered by Nazi Germany. This unprecedented tragedy pricked the conscience of the world and created a global consensus that the Jewish people deserved a safe haven. In 1947, the newly formed United Nations approved a plan to partition the British Mandate of Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab. Then, on May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion stood before a crowd in Tel Aviv and declared the establishment of the State of Israel. For the first time in 2 millennia, the Jewish people once again had a sovereign homeland in their ancient land. But this declaration of independence was also an immediate catalyst for war. The very next day, a coalition of 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded the nascent state with the explicit goal of its annihilation. It was the first Arab-Israeli war. Against all conceivable odds, the fledgling Israeli defense forces resisted, survived, and ultimately triumphed. even expanding their territory beyond the borders defined by the UN partition plan. For the Jewish people, it was nothing short of a miracle, a modern-day fulfillment of prophecy. For the Arab world, it was the Nakba, or the catastrophe. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes, creating a refugee crisis that remains unresolved to this day. The surrounding Muslim nations, many of whom saw themselves as the heirs of the Ishmaelite tribes, vehemently refused to accept the rebirth of Israel. For them, the existence of a Jewish state in the heart of the Middle East was a historical, theological, and political anathema. And so, the ancient conflict between the children of Ishmael and the children of Isaac was violently reborn in the form of modern warfare. It was no longer just a spiritual dispute. It had become a brutal fight for territory, sovereignty, and sheer survival. Following the establishment of Israel in 1948, the Arab world came to view the new state as an existential threat and an intolerable injustice. It wasn't merely about the loss of territory, it was a deep, open wound in the collective Arab and Islamic honor. The neighboring nations vowed never to recognize Israel's existence. In the decades that followed, Israel fought several more wars for its survival. The most consequential of these was the Six-Day War of 1967. Surrounded by the armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, with support from Lebanon and Iraq, Israel faced a chorus of Arab rhetoric promising to wipe Israel off the map. In a stunning preemptive strike and a subsequent lightning campaign that lasted only 6 days, Israel decisively defeated the combined Arab forces. The victory was overwhelming. Israel conquered vast and strategically vital territories, the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, and most symbolically, East Jerusalem and the West Bank from Jordan. For the first time since the Roman destruction in 70 AD, the entirety of Jerusalem, including the Old City and the Temple Mount, was once again under Jewish control. This monumental victory, while securing Israel's immediate future, poured fuel on the fires of hatred. The Arab world was humiliated by the defeat, and the Palestinians, who had hoped for their own state, now found themselves under Israeli military occupation, without territory, without sovereignty, and seemingly without hope. This profound frustration and despair metastasized into organized rebellion. The first major armed Palestinian groups emerged, most notably the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, led by Yasser Arafat. The nature of the conflict began to shift. It was no longer confined to battles between conventional armies. It devolved into a grinding war of attrition, marked by guerrilla warfare, terrorist attacks, and brutal assaults on civilians. The 1970s and 80s witnessed a horrifying escalation of violence. The world watched in shock at airplane hijackings, bombings of school buses, and explosions in crowded marketplaces. The conflict bled beyond Israel's borders, spreading terror across the globe. Terrorism became a central weapon in the fight against the Jewish state. In response, Israel adopted an increasingly hardline policy of security measures and fierce military reprisals. The entire region became locked in a relentless cycle of violence, where every act of aggression bred a vengeful retaliation, and every death sowed the seeds for more hatred. The Middle East was transformed into a powder keg, constantly on the verge of explosion. The conflict between Jews and Arabs ceased to be a mere regional issue. It became a symbol of the global divide between East and West, a flashpoint in the complex relationship between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Before becoming Israel's most formidable and ideologically driven enemy, Iran was the heir to the ancient Persian civilization, a nation with deep roots tracing back to the mighty Persian Empire. This was the same empire that, in biblical times, under the command of Cyrus the Great, was used by God as an instrument to liberate the Jewish people from their captivity in Babylon. In the 20th century, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah was a key ally of the United States, a champion of modernization, secularism, and technological progress. During his reign, Israel and Iran enjoyed a surprisingly cooperative relationship, with robust trade ties, diplomatic recognition, and even military collaboration. However, beneath the surface of this Western-oriented modernization, the deeply religious Iranian populace, predominantly Shia Muslims, viewed the rapid secularization of their country with profound suspicion and resentment. American influence grew while traditional religious values were often suppressed. The simmering tensions finally erupted in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution. Led by the exiled cleric Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the revolution overthrew the Shah and transformed Iran into the world's first Islamic republic. A theocracy took power, a regime that would govern based on its interpretation of Sharia law, placing Shia Islam at the absolute center of national life. One of the very first acts of the new revolutionary regime was to sever all ties with Israel, expel its diplomats, and declare unwavering support for the Palestinian cause. The new Iran recast Israel as the Little Satan, the regional proxy of the Great Satan, the United States. The ideology of revolutionary Iran was not merely nationalist, it was global in its ambition. The regime championed its brand of Islam as a tool for the liberation of all oppressed peoples, especially Muslims, from Western domination. And in their worldview, the State of Israel was the primary obstacle, a colonialist implant in the heart of the Islamic world. From the 1980s onward, Iran began to actively fund, train, and arm militant groups dedicated to fighting Israel. First came Palestinian Islamic Jihad, then Hezbollah in Lebanon, and later Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The war against Israel was no longer just about territory, it became a spiritual crusade. As Iran began to develop its nuclear program, claiming it was for peaceful purposes, its leaders repeatedly and publicly declared that Israel was a cancerous tumor that must be eradicated. The former ally had now become the heart of a new, menacing, and existential threat. Since the revolution of 1979, Iran has been governed not just by politicians, but by a powerful clerical establishment of Shia clerics. At the apex of this structure is the supreme leader, today Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who wields more power than the president and the parliament combined. Iran's constitution explicitly states that its mission is not merely to govern the country, but to export the values of the Islamic Revolution to the entire world. The struggle against Zionism and perceived Western oppression is an integral part of this divine mission. For the Ayatollahs, Israel is not simply a political adversary. It is an illegitimate entity occupying sacred land, which according to their Islamic theology belongs to the global Ummah, the universal nation of Muslims. Therefore, in their view, Israel's removal is a religious imperative. Iran also positions itself as the protector of oppressed Muslims everywhere, using this as a justification to fund and arm proxy groups that fight on its behalf against Israel, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. These groups, with Iran's backing, have launched thousands of rockets into Israel, carried out devastating attacks, and spread anti-Israel propaganda throughout the Muslim world. For its part, Iran typically denies direct involvement, but its fingerprints are on every operation. A particularly dangerous element of Iranian doctrine is the belief that accelerating the arrival of the Mahdi, the Shia Messiah, requires global instability and chaos, with a particular focus on Jerusalem. This apocalyptic eschatological factor elevates the fight against Israel to a cosmic end-of-days dimension. In this way, Iran's foreign policy is a potent and volatile mix of religious ideology, geopolitical strategy, and jihadist fervor. Israel is not just a rival state, it is a theological obstacle, and the destruction of Israel has become one of the central, non-negotiable pillars of the regime's discourse. This institutionalized hatred is taught in schools, preached in mosques, proclaimed in official speeches, and embedded in popular culture. Generations of children are indoctrinated to see Israel as an absolute evil, feeding a seemingly endless cycle of conflict. Lacking the capacity or will for a direct conventional war with the militarily superior Israel, Iran has perfected a strategy of indirect warfare, funding, arming, and training a network of militias and extremist groups that operate on Israel's borders. This network is ominously known as the Axis of Resistance. The most powerful and dangerous group in this network is Hezbollah, the Party of God, based in Lebanon. Founded in 1982 with direct support from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, in the aftermath of Israel's invasion of Lebanon, Hezbollah has transformed from a small Shia militia into a formidable paramilitary force, possessing an arsenal of hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles. Hezbollah has fought several wars against Israel, most notably a devastating conflict in 2006. Since then, it has amassed an even more sophisticated arsenal, including long-range precision-guided missiles capable of hitting any target within Israel. Much of this weaponry is supplied or financed by Tehran. To Israel's south, Iran provides crucial support to Hamas, the Sunni Islamist group that rules the Gaza Strip. Despite the theological differences between Shia Iran and Sunni Hamas, they are united by the common goal of Israel's destruction. Hamas receives technical, financial, and military support from Iran, enabling it to wage a continuous low-level war against its neighbor. Both Hezbollah and Hamas employ a cynical strategy of embedding their military assets within civilian populations. They place rocket launchers in schools, command centers in hospitals, and weapons caches in residential buildings, deliberately forcing an Israeli military response that inevitably causes civilian casualties. This plays directly into the narrative of Zionist aggression and helps garner international sympathy for their cause. Iran is also deeply active in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, propping up Shia militias and influencing governments to create a Shia crescent, a land corridor of influence stretching from Tehran to the Mediterranean Sea. This strategic arch allows Iran to encircle Israel with allied forces and missile batteries, creating a constant, multi-front threat. Beyond direct military support, Iran maintains a vast propaganda network of television channels, websites, and non-governmental organizations that disseminate its anti-Israel ideology throughout the Arab world, Europe, and even Latin America. The war is also psychological and cultural. This indirect war, waged by Iran's armed proxies, has kept Israel on a permanent state of high alert for decades. Every attack by Hezbollah or Hamas, no matter how small, carries the signature and the funding of Tehran. In recent decades, Israel and Iran have been engaged in an undeclared high-stakes shadow war, a kind of Middle Eastern Cold War fought in the dark. Both sides have avoided a full-scale direct confrontation, but they clash relentlessly through espionage, sabotage, cyber attacks, and targeted assassinations. Israel views Iran's nuclear program as the ultimate existential threat. The conviction within the Israeli security establishment is that if Iran were to acquire a nuclear weapon, it would not hesitate to use it, or, at the very least, to use the threat of annihilation to blackmail the entire region into submission. Consequently, Israel has adopted a proactive policy of sabotage and disruption. Israeli intelligence services have been widely accused of carrying out a series of daring and covert operations, assassinating key Iranian nuclear scientists, orchestrating mysterious explosions at sensitive nuclear facilities like Natanz and Isfahan, unleashing sophisticated cyber attacks like the infamous Stuxnet virus that crippled Iranian centrifuges, and recruiting high-level informants within the Iranian regime. For its part, Iran has vowed revenge time and again. It has retaliated with its own indirect attacks, sponsoring militia strikes on U.S. and allied targets, orchestrating bombings against Israeli and Jewish targets abroad, harassing Israeli-linked shipping in the Persian Gulf, and issuing a constant stream of threats from the military leaders of the Revolutionary Guard. Both nations are locked in a perilous game of silent, deadly reprisal. All the while, Iran continues to advance its nuclear program, enriching uranium to levels far beyond what is permitted by international agreements, bringing it ever closer to the threshold of a nuclear bomb. Israel repeatedly warns the world that time is running out. The risk of this shadow war breaking out into open, direct conflict increases with each passing year. Israel also conducts frequent airstrikes within Syria, targeting and destroying convoys of advanced weaponry sent from Iran and destined for Hezbollah. These strikes are often unacknowledged but occur with near-weekly frequency in a relentless campaign to degrade Iran's military entrenchment on its northern border. Amidst this, international diplomacy struggles to contain the tensions. Nuclear deals are signed and then abandoned, sanctions are imposed on Iran, and meetings are held between world powers, but the climate remains perilously tense. No treaty has brought lasting peace. This Cold War has become the defining backdrop for the entire modern Middle East, a bitter contest between a Western-aligned, technologically advanced democracy armed to the teeth and a radical Islamic theocracy determined to realize its apocalyptic vision. The Bible does not merely recount Israel's past. For believers, it provides a startlingly detailed forecast of its future. Numerous prophecies, written thousands of years ago, speak of great wars involving Israel in the last days. Many of these prophecies align with the current geopolitical situation in a manner that is deeply unsettling. In the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, we read of a great invasion of Israel, led by a figure named Gog of the land of Magog. This prophecy details a grand coalition of nations that will come against the mountains of Israel. Critically, this alliance explicitly includes ancient Persia, which is modern-day Iran. It also lists other nations like Kush, modern Sudan, or Ethiopia, Put, Libya, Gomer, and Togarma, regions associated with modern Turkey. According to the prophecy, these nations will unite to invade an Israeli people who have been regathered from the nations and are living in apparent safety, in unwalled villages, a phrase suggesting a time of false security or a temporary peace agreement. In a stunning turn of events, the prophecy declares that God himself will bring this coalition against Israel, only to then intervene supernaturally to destroy it. He will unleash a great earthquake, torrential rains, hailstones, fire from heaven, pestilence, and a great confusion among the enemy armies, causing them to turn on one another. The outcome is a miraculous, divine victory for Israel that reveals God's glory to the nations. The prophet Isaiah also prophesies against Damascus, the capital of Syria, in Isaiah 17. Behold, Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins. This prophecy has yet to be completely fulfilled, but many Bible scholars believe it could be triggered during a wider regional conflict involving Iran and its Syrian ally. In the book of Revelation, chapter 16 describes the final battle of Armageddon, the ultimate confrontation between the nations of the world and the Lamb of God. This conflict is situated in the valley of Megiddo in northern Israel and involves the kings of the East and other global powers. The prophet Zechariah in chapter 12 states that in the end times all the nations of the earth will gather against Jerusalem, but that God will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling and a heavy stone for all who try to move it. The chapter goes on to promise that God himself will fight for his people. The Mount of Olives will split in two, and the Messiah will reign as king over all the earth. This is painted as the apocalyptic culmination of human history. For countless scholars and devout Christians around the world, what we are witnessing today in the Middle East, the siege of Israel, the hatred of the nations, the nuclear tension with Iran, is not simply geopolitics. It is the visible, tangible prelude to the fulfillment of these ancient prophecies. The end times, they believe, may not be a distant theological concept, but an imminent reality. In a hypothetical yet terrifyingly plausible near-future scenario, let's imagine that in June of 2005, the world witnesses the eruption of a conflict that many have long feared, the beginning of a full-scale regional or even global war. For the first time in history, Israel and Iran exchange massive, direct military strikes, leaving scores dead on both sides and the world holding its breath. The conflagration begins with Operation Rising Lion, a massive preemptive Israeli air campaign launched in response to intelligence that Iran has reached the nuclear threshold, combined with a series of deadly attacks by Iranian-backed militias. Over 200 Israeli aircraft, including advanced stealth fighters, strike strategic targets deep inside Iran. Bombs rain down on the nuclear facilities at Natanz and Isfahan, on Revolutionary Guard bases, and on command and control centers. Iran's response is swift and furious. It unleashes a barrage of hundreds of ballistic missiles and swarms of attack drones against Tel Aviv, Haifa, Bat Yam, and Jerusalem. Air raid sirens wail across the nation as Israel's Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow defense systems light up the night sky, struggling to intercept the onslaught. The initial toll is devastating. Hundreds of casualties in Iran and dozens in Israel. Hospitals are overwhelmed, cities are scarred by explosions, and an apocalyptic tension hangs in the air, a dark premonition of something far worse to come. The skies of the Middle East have become a corridor of fire. The Israeli Prime Minister declares to a shaken nation that Israel is defending its very right to exist, and vows to continue the offensive until Iran's nuclear and military capability is completely dismantled. On the other side, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, decries the attacks as a demonic act and calls for a sacred jihad against the Zionist entity. Simultaneously, Hezbollah in Lebanon, pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen, all allies of Iran, launch coordinated rocket and missile attacks against northern and southern Israel. Hamas renews its attacks from Gaza. The war is no longer bilateral. It has become a multi-front siege against the Jewish state. The United States, despite being Israel's staunchest ally, urges restraint. The G7 and the United Nations issue frantic calls for an immediate ceasefire, but their pleas fall on deaf ears. Analysts warn that if a major power like Russia or China enters the equation to back Iran, the conflict could spiral into a third world war. The world watches in horror. Protests erupt in streets globally. Financial markets plummet. The price of oil skyrockets, and religious leaders from all faiths speak of prophecies being fulfilled before their very eyes. Israel and Iran, two ancient peoples and modern arch-enemies, are now closer to an all-out, history-altering confrontation than ever before. Faced with the current chaos and the specter of such a future, many are asking the ultimate question: what happens next? The Bible, written thousands of years ago, offers a remarkably clear and detailed prophetic timeline for the end of the age. And it points directly to Israel, Jerusalem, and a period of unprecedented global tribulation. In Ezekiel 38 and 39, the prophet describes that great invasion of Israel in the last days. The leader of this invasion, Gog, leads a coalition including Persia, Iran, Cush, Put, and others against the land of Israel. As we've seen, this alliance is not defeated by the Israeli army, but by the direct supernatural intervention of God himself, who sends earthquakes, fire, and confusion upon the invading armies. Many scholars believe this attack could occur after a deceptive peace treaty is signed, during a time of false security for Israel. The book of Revelation, chapter 16, speaks of the final battle, Armageddon, where the kings of the world gather to make war against God. Zechariah 14 adds the detail that the Lord himself will descend upon the Mount of Olives, which will split in two, and he will fight for his people. The book of Daniel warns of a world leader, often identified as the Antichrist, who will confirm a 7-year peace covenant with Israel. However, he will break this treaty in the middle of the 7 years. This act will usher in the beginning of the Great Tribulation, a period of suffering so intense that Jesus himself, in Matthew 24, said it would be unlike anything the world has ever seen. Are we approaching this scenario? Many scholars of prophecy believe we are. The rapid advancement of artificial intelligence capable of global surveillance, the move towards centralized global governance, the rise in global conflicts, the increasing persecution of Christians worldwide, and now the imminent nuclear threat in the Middle East, all are seen as converging signs. But amid these dire warnings, there is also a promise of hope. The Bible's ultimate prophetic message is that at the climax of this chaos, Jesus Christ will return. He will establish his righteous kingdom from Jerusalem. He will restore all things, and he will judge the nations. The Bible says every eye will see him, and every knee will bow. For those who have placed their faith in him, there will be nothing to fear. In the face of all this, only one question remains for each of us. Are you ready? Because what is happening today is not just politics or war, it is the unfolding of sacred scripture. The future has already begun, and the most important decision you will ever make remains a spiritual one. The current conflict between Israel and Iran may seem like just another chapter in the long, bloody history of the Middle East. But for those who know the prophecies of the Bible, the signs are unmistakable. The prophetic clock is ticking faster and faster, and what is coming next will alter the course of the world forever. The Bible speaks of a time when Israel will be surrounded by its enemies. The prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39 announcing an invasion from the north led by Gog with the support of Persia, Iran, has not yet occurred, but the current political alignment of nations strongly suggests that this very scenario is becoming increasingly plausible. Before that great war, however, other prophecies suggest a period of false peace. Daniel 9:27 speaks of a leader who will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, a period of 7 prophetic years. This treaty will likely grant Israel a sense of security, perhaps even allowing for the rebuilding of a third temple in Jerusalem. However, this covenant of peace will be catastrophically broken after 3.5 years. The same leader identified in 2 Thessalonians 2 and Revelation 13 as the Antichrist will turn against Israel. He will desecrate the holy place, forbid the sacrifices, and demand to be worshipped as God by the entire world. This event will trigger the Great Tribulation, a 3.5-year period of unprecedented global persecution against both Jews and Christians who refuse to bow down. The world political system will morph into a global spiritual dictatorship, complete with total surveillance, economic control through a mark of the beast, and a demand for absolute loyalty. It will be the time of the beast, the false prophet, and the image of the beast. At the very end of these 7 years, the armies of the world will march on Jerusalem for one final cataclysmic battle. This is the Battle of Armageddon, described in Revelation 16 and Zechariah 14. The world will appear to be on the brink of total annihilation. But then, just as all hope seems lost, the heavens will part. Jesus Christ will return visibly and gloriously with the armies of heaven. His feet will touch the Mount of Olives, which will split in two. He will destroy the forces of evil with the breath of his mouth and will establish his millennial kingdom on earth. This will not just be the end of a war, it will be the end of human history as we have known it. A new age will dawn, 1,000 years of perfect peace, justice, and truth, ruled from a throne in Jerusalem where every tear will be wiped away. You have just heard a truth that many ignore, a revelation that is not found in the nightly news, but is written in the pages of Holy Scripture.
The year is
The prophetic
2000
clock
BC.
is ticking.
The plague.
Israel is at the center of it all. The nations are moving into place, and the return of Christ is drawing closer than ever before. If this message has resonated deep within your spirit, don't let it fade away. Subscribe to our channel. Share this video with those who need to understand the times in which we are living. Comment now, "I believe in the return of the Lord," because the more people who hear this truth, the more will be awakened. And remember the promise: he who endures to the end will be saved and will receive the crown of life. Revelation 2:10.